Hello, welcome back to Kairos. If you haven't been here before, my name is Joshua Pfeiffer and I'm here today with Rachel Schilling to talk about growing faith in the home. Rachel, welcome to Kairos.
Thank you, Josh.
Good to have you here. So Rachel, perhaps you can begin by just telling us a little bit about who you are.
Sure. So I work for Grow Ministries and have for about 4 years. And part of the reason and my passion for doing that is actually helping parents in their role for sharing their faith at home. I have 3 kids and it's one of my highs of being a parent is actually being able to talk to them about our faith and live life together.
And you're from Queensland, is that right?
Yes, that's right. Live on the beautiful Sunshine Coast.
Good for you. So we're down here in Adelaide at the moment. The temperature's dropped a little bit the last few days, so hope you're coping with that okay. So big picture sort of stuff, why is it important that we talk about growing faith in the home?
Well, research will tell us, firstly, that parents are the biggest influence on faith. They have the biggest influence on faith in its long-lasting effects, and they just, it's the number one key to kids having faith later on in life.
It makes me think of many experiences that I've had in talking to people that just back these sorts of things up. I think in my own life, went through all sorts of influences, good influences in the church and with pastors and with courses and with other significant people in my life. But if I think back, the things that come to your mind are simple things like mum singing hymns or Christian songs at my bedside, praying, with me before I go to sleep, these sorts of things. And I hear these things often from elderly Christians as well. Their minds go right back to their childhood and their parents. And it's just interesting that the research backs this up.
Yeah, like I think 40 or 50 years of research continues to say parents are the key.
And it's not always the case, I suppose, as well, that sometimes parents don't feel equipped for these sorts of things. They don't know where to start. Perhaps they haven't had great models themselves.
That's true.
And so it's good we have people like you in our church to help resource and encourage people. Yes. What do you see as the big challenges for parents in passing on the faith in the home, talking to their kids about God and all these sorts of things?
Well, I think, like you've already mentioned, parents sometimes, and I think more and more, feel ill-equipped to do that with their kids. They don't know where to start, what to do. Their kids might be older and they've come to realise that this is important and they just think, it's too hard to start. And often we just say, that's all it is. It's just starting with one small thing. We often talk about, in our Growing Faith Home resource, the very simple idea at the beginning of sharing our highs and lows, which actually isn't really even anything about faith. It's actually just about life. And so that seems to be a really good first step for people to just start talking about what was the best part of today and start having those conversations that can just dig a little bit deeper or just connect people a little bit more.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. I've noticed as a pastor in the church, one of the challenges is that you can start talking about, we might talk about praying as a family around the table. You're making a big assumption that, first of all, people are at a table, and second of all, that they know how to talk with each other. So many of these traditional parts of family life are not there. And so, and I think of one of my mentors in the spiritual life, he would constantly come back to this refrain of starting where you are. And I think of that when I read your first point here, we're starting where people are and not necessarily even having these family conversations often about anything, let alone faith. And it strikes me as very wise.
And the beautiful thing about that is you can do it anywhere.
Right.
You can be in the car, captured audiences is pretty good. At the table happens, sure, for some people, but often, parents are in the car a lot with their kids, taking them places. So that's a great place to just have one of those conversations that who knows where it might lead.
Yeah, on the way to school is one that works for us sometimes. And the morning rush is, go, get them out the door, but on the way there's this buffer, and it naturally happens sometimes. And so for you personally, I guess you talked about having a passion in this area, and you've been able to work in this area. What about, I'm curious about where that may have come from, and what about your own upbringing? Did you grow up in a Christian home? Did you have this sort of stuff modelled to you, or What about for you, Rachel?
Yeah, certainly, Josh. I don't know. I think there was definitely, grew up in a Christian home, of course. There were definitely things that were modelled. I, have very disciplined and faithful parents who took us to church every week. That was just not negotiable. We would just go. And I think sometimes that's part of it. I've really come to learn myself that we go to church sometimes not because of what we feel like we'll get out of it, but God might just surprise us when we get there. And it might be not even having to do with the worship. It might be that we connect with someone that really needed to have a chat that day. And it can be a whole range of reasons. I'd love my kids to understand that as well. Church is much bigger than it's boring or whatever, whatever their sense of feeling might be that morning. So we did some devotion. We had some phases of our family life when I was growing up that we had some devotion times, I remember.
I like that phases. I think that's most people's experience, actually.
But there was so little resources back then too, and I think people sort of clung on to things like little visits with God, and whatever was out there to help them along that journey. I went to a lot of camps as a teenager, and they really had a big impact. And I think my parents could see too that. They certainly make a difference through those teenager years, particularly in your faith journey. So,
My own experience growing up is that when I think back to these sorts of faith things in the home, it's often I can remember it wasn't always easy for mum and dad to do these sorts of things with kids, and in a funny way, I can remember even the struggle with it. I think was a witness to me in some sense. Like you sort of as a kid, I wouldn't have been able to articulate this at the time, but it was like, what's the big deal? Just let it go if it's not working, But they persisted, kept trying to do things, and recalcitrant little children that were complaining and whining, but on they went. It made an impact on me that whatever this is they're on about, it's something pretty important. They think it's pretty important. And so then that's your childhood. And what about with your own kids then? Has this flowed into your own family life, and how does it go walking the talk, I guess?
So I guess the initial spark probably that when I look back now is really the seed that was planted was that our first son died just after he was born. Wow. And it wasn't probably till not long after, in time after that I just began to really have an eternal perspective. Like what else really matters for my kids is that I know they're going to be meeting Jesus one day. So that was just so powerful. And so from there, it was just like, what else can I do? I'm going to take every opportunity and moment for our family to be together in heaven again one day. And so, it was, I just think, that for me was a pivotal moment, but it's also helped me understand how important it is to help parents and equip them and give them starting points and give them resources and everything we possibly can to help them share their faith with their kids.
And so your first son or daughter son died, and you were able to have children after they have children now. And you were mentioning I think three children.
Kids,
Okay, and how old are they?
11, 10 and 6.
Okay, so you're working in this area of our church, resources for growing faith at home, and you've got the context to try it all out, live it all out.
They are a bit of a guinea pig sometimes.
Right. Can you tell us a little bit more then about Grow Ministries itself and who they are in the Lutheran Church of Australia, why you exist, and
sure. So Grow Ministries is or was called the Board for Child, Youth and Family Ministry, and now Grow because again, as researchers told us, children and youth and family kind of just keeps extending. When we really start to think of what helps faith and helps us grow, we need all people of all ages together. And so a family can be lots of different things these days as well. Households look really different than what they used to. Families sometimes have multiple generations living under the one roof. And so really it is about the whole body of Christ coming together. And so one of the major focuses that we think about is along with faith at home, is that we want to be living in intergenerational communities. And so we know the impact of older people and younger people together sharing their faith, learning together, serving alongside each other. And so those two things are really powerful together. So they would be the two things that Grow Ministries would probably advocate for, that kids are in a home, family environment, sharing their faith with their parents, living life together like that, and then in a community where they are nourished and fed by lots of different generations, sharing and worshipping faith together.
Very good. Very much. I've had really positive interactions with Grow Ministries over the years, and being in a parish, you can see how very much working in complementary ways with what's happening in the local congregation, and providing resources and equipping. It's a real joy to me that things like this exist in our church, because when I think back through history, this sort of emphasis was such a big deal in the Lutheran Church going right back. You read Luther's catechism, and he has this thing about in the home. This is where his mind goes in terms of growing faith and praying together. And I think the experience in our church is pretty common across the church, but it strikes me as especially sad that some of these things have been lost along the way. But all the better that we are doing what we can, to help and grow faith in the home. That you have these very helpful, practical resources, and I know one of the main ones is growing faith at home. I think that's what it's actually called, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah.
And so I was wondering today if you could actually just lead us through this resource and tell us a bit about how it can be used.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, so there's kind of two parts to it, which can be like folded in half. And the thing that we like most is that it actually comes in paper form. Kind of a bit countercultural, but like most things, if it's actually sitting on a table or on the breakfast bar or somewhere, people are going to see it and be reminded that these are some of the things we can do together as a family or a household, whatever it might be. So we start often on the caring conversation side, which opens up conversation. And then there's a couple of questions to draw people in. For example, this coming Sunday, we've got Blessed are those who trust in the Lord as our 6th Sunday after Epiphany. And so the first question is, have you ever had someone let you down? And we share our experiences in that space. Then the questions dig a little bit further deeper. And then we can go into the devotion time, which looks at, on the Sunday, the gospel reading for that day. And then there's a number of other readings for the week which have a similar theme, but also have the Old and New Testament and that are tucked away in there as well, which is
for the previous Sunday, right?
No, for the Sunday.
For the Sunday to come.
Okay. Yeah. And then of course you've got the Gospel for the next Sunday coming up as well. And then we just often in my family we would read that passage, and my children at that age that I might say. Is there a word that stood out for you, or what did that make you think of, or we just have a little bit of a discussion about what that might mean. Because
I think it definitely looks different with different age kids, doesn't
absolutely.
it? And I've been conscious of that now that my kids are 9, 7, and 3, and so you've got a fair range there. And we've been doing these sorts of things for a while, and you sort of grow with it, and you're flexible with it, and you gradually learn how to use it in an age-appropriate way, I've found.
Yeah. And the other thing is that this lends itself to any age.
Yes.
So a college council might begin its devotion time using this format or any part of this as well. So it's great that it can be used for youth, for Sunday school, it can be used at home. It's got sort of a wide range of applications.
One of the other things I'll just throw in before you go on is I mentioned before how I like the philosophy of starting where you are at, but then also on the other end of that, it's lovely, I think, to have this intentional connection with the worshipping congregation as well. At least many churches will be using these readings on a Sunday, and just that link between faith in the home, faith in the wider church community is I think, a really special one. So.
Just on that, sometimes for those churches that don't have Sunday school, for example, there's a handful of children that might happen to pick up something that the pastor said about the gospel or what they've preached on. One of the great things is that you can come home and say, "What did you hear Pastor Josh say anything about the gospel reading tape?" So you can tie those things in quite well, even if it's not a Sunday school activity. But there's just so many different ways that you can talk about it as a family.
Absolutely, and they surprise you, kids. What they remember, what they pick up on. You think they're colouring the whole time or annoying their brother and sister or whatever, and then so I've asked them before about something, and they've just about floored me because they actually heard stuff.
And then we have a little space for rituals and traditions, and some of these are just lovely nighttime blessings. Sometimes, if I've been organised, you can print that out and put them on the kids' beds to remind you about the blessing you can say for each other. Or at a family prayer time, you might be able to pray a prayer at the end of this devotion time, which is written out for you. You don't need to make up anything yourself. And just blessing each other is such a beautiful gift of grace to each other. So the creative response time is another thing that can be done at home. Often families are pretty busy, so we often don't get to that point. But it's a great thing to read through and just get an idea or a sense of something that could happen in that space. Sunday schools often use that part as part of their follow-on from what's going on in the devotion time.
And so I'll put some links to some of these resources down in the description. But just as an example, this one here I'm looking at, it's starting to think about Lent and different ways families might creatively engage in the Lenten time and those sorts of things.
One of the best ways that a lot of people use this is just to have it as their mealtime prayer. These change every week, so they've got some focus or link back into the theme, and very simply having this on the table or at breakfast, wherever it might be, anyone can pick that up and say the grace. Again, if you're unfamiliar with saying grace, it's all there to read, ready to go. Some people still really like having a verse to learn for the week. We actually have a blackboard up in our house where I quickly write up a verse that we try and look at or say together every now and then. It's near the door, so if you're going out the garage or the front door, you kind of don't get a chance not to look at it. So that helps us just keep the word in the front of our minds.
And just if I can make another comment there, one of the things that strikes me again as you're talking through this is how we make this available in our congregation and have good feedback from young families as well as people of all different ages, as you've mentioned. And one of the interesting things is that it seems to me there was a time in the church when things like, say, ritual, traditional, memorising a verse went through a bit of it. They were sort of dirty words sort of stage. And it seems to me that one of the things Grow have done is bring together some of the best of the wisdom of the church with quite a contemporary way of just presenting things and making it attractive and starting where you're at and those sorts of things, but realising actually little rituals can be really significant, especially for kids.
Absolutely.
And I still think one of the things with my kids, just lighting a candle when they were little, it was just enough to key them into this as a sort of sacred time and space. And so I really appreciate the way that this resource seems to bring some of those things together.
Yeah, and probably the last, we call these the 4 keys. So the caring conversations, devotions, rituals and tradition and service. The last key is really, that kind of, transformation of faith is coming out in through our hands and the ways we can serve together. And that, again, they're different every week. So, whether or not you get a chance to do them one week or the next, there's heaps of wonderful ideas to serve as a family or, again, they could be youth activities, lots of different ways you could use that.
Yeah. It's like a menu, this resource, isn't it? It's not something that you need to go through every part. It's not designed that way to go through systematically every single point. But different contexts, different families, different groups use it creatively, and you can sort of. And I've found when I've used this before that you you just tend to grab parts out that are appropriate and like, ordering off a menu. Is that what I have in mind? Yeah.
There is actually a user's guide too. So if people are interested in a little bit more information about how to use that for their, as a congregation to support families, and then there's a home user's guide too for people just to, remind themselves about what are all these parts and how can I use them. But like you said, the menu idea is a really, really great way to think about it.
And so would this be, the Growing Faith at Home, would that be your most popular resource at Grow?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
I think it has been something that's been around for a while and it's evolved and changed over the years. But yeah, it's definitely something, I think, because it's just can be used in so many different ways. People, and I guess congregations find it as a resource that they can feel they're helping and supporting families in this space.
And if anybody watching or listening hasn't used this before, where would you find it? How would you access it?
So it's on our Grow Ministries website, growministries.org.au, and it's under the resources section.
Yeah. So as we begin to draw to a close, I'm thinking of potentially people, maybe they're struggling in this area with their own home life and growing faith in the home. I'm just wondering if you have any last words of encouragement for people who are in that sort of situation.
I think a little bit like where we started, Josh. It was just, take a small step. It really, it might feel awkward to start with, probably will, but it's like muscles, like exercising, like all those things that we do. Once you start, it does feel a bit hard at the beginning, but the more you give it, the practice that you can give it, the easier it does become. It's
so true, and again, I think of advice I've been given in areas of Christian life, like prayer. Haven't had much of a prayer life, that's okay. But when you start, don't start with an hour a day. Start with a minute a day, or just start where you are. Start small and build up. It seems to be the wise path, I think, with these things.
Grow Ministries is really happy to hear from anyone too that might want help in any way. We will take phone calls or visits or anything that we can do to support people in that space. So we love to hear from people too if they would like to contact us.
Well, thank you so much again, Rachel, for your time today and for sharing this with us, and God's blessings on your work in our church and beyond, and in your own family.
Thanks, Josh.
And thanks again.
Yeah, thank you.
God bless you.
Thank you.